You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast.
Hello, Will.
Hello, David.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 226 of Common Descent, where this podcast where we talk about evolutionary history and Earth history and paleontology and stuff like that. This episode's topic is dodos.
Dodos! Do-de-do-do-do-de-do-do!
Very famous group of birds, famous for all the wrong reasons, for having been driven extinct by us terrible humans. This episode, we'll talk a bit about that legacy of dodos. We'll talk about what we know about them and their relatives, how we study them using fossils as well as historical reports and such. And we'll do some philosophical waxing about the cultural impact and influence of dodos and what they mean for our understanding of our place in the world ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm excited because dodos are an animal I have known for a long time, but not actually known in any detail.
Yeah, they are way cooler than they get credit for. They are very interesting birds. This episode topic was requested, as all of our topics are. This one by Jay, Lily, and Sam. Thank you for that request. If you, dear listener, have a request you'd like to make, you can go to our website, to our topic request form, link in the episode description. Before we get into the meat of the episode, some announcements. Number one, as always, this podcast is supported by Patreon. We are eternally grateful to all of the folks out there who lend us their financial support, as well as the moral support that goes along with it on Patreon. In return, patrons get access to bonus content and director's notes and live streams and merch and all sorts of cool, fun stuff. And at certain levels, patrons get a shout out on the podcast. This episode, we would like to welcome new patrons, Robin and Vebev. Thank you so much for contributing.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you.
While we're giving shout outs to contributors, we also want to give a special shout out to Andrea, who made a big old donation to us a little while back.
It was very cool. Thank you so much for that, Andrea. Every now and then we get donations through the PayPal link that we have, and it's awesome. This was just a particularly exciting and surprising one.
Yeah, so if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do so at Patreon or at our PayPal. Go to our website, go to links in the episode description, and figure out how you best want to do it. Speaking of supporting the podcast, some of you may have noticed around the release of this episode that you're getting ads when you listen to our podcast. That is not an issue with your podcast player. We have turned on ads for the podcast. This is something that we went a very long time without doing because we didn't want to bother with it. But as we continue to expand the podcast and as we build a business and look for new things to do in science communication with our listeners, ads are going to be really helpful for helping to keep the podcast and our business going on forward. So you may be getting ads at the beginning and the ends of episodes. That is a new feature, but hopefully not too terribly disruptive.
Yeah, we put them there so that hopefully if you are binging our episodes, you'll just get a little commercial break between each episode and not be interrupted while going through the discussion.
Yeah. Also, those of you listening on Patreon shouldn't be getting ads. That is one of the benefits on Patreon. So if you're getting ads by listening on Patreon, let us know. That's a problem. All of this support is to help us continue to do the fun, cool, educational things that we get to do with the podcast, including two very exciting upcoming things here as we near the end of 2025. One is we're doing another museum meetup at the Fernbank Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, October 18th at 1 p.m. We'll be hanging out in the museum exhibits. If you're around, come say hi, come chat with us, come look at giant dinosaur skeletons with us. We're going to have a great time.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
This is Will's museum, so it's very exciting.
I'm so excited. We can all look at the old taxidermied alligator together.
Ooh. Also, October is coming up, and that means spooky season. Every year in October, we release a bunch of episodes where we speculate upon the hypothetical evolution of monsters from popular fiction. This year, our theme is Monsters of Nintendo. It's going to be so much fun. One episode every Saturday in the month of October, then a bonus QE episode at the beginning of November, then a spooky live stream for anybody to join the second weekend in November. Spooky season, it's almost off. And once it is off, the spooky channel in the Discord will also be going off. So come and join. Let us know your thoughts and your musings.
Yes, it's going to be so good.
Love a good year of spooky, and so far, they've all been good years of spooky. Those are some announcements. Let's do the news. Every episode, before we get into our main discussion topic, we like to tackle some news from the world of paleontological science, new research, new studies, keeps us all up to date on what's going on out there. Will, what news do you have today?
I have two newses about new species, both pretty straightforward, but I had to pick one for my bit and one for a bit that I've stumbled into. The first one is a new species of crocodiliform from Argentina. This is research by Fernando Novas et al. In PLOS ONE, and the article is by Patrick Pester in Live Science. This new species is Costensuchus atrox, and it is the first crocodiliform specimen from Trio Formation in Santa Cruz, Argentina. This is a about 70 million year old fossil site, and they found a really nicely preserved skull and some of the body skeleton that was encased in a big concretion. So, big hard bit of earth preserved this skeleton. This is a large hypercarnivorous terrestrial crocodiliform. So this would have been one of the main predators of this ecosystem. It grew to about 11 and a half feet long, or 3.5 meters. So this was a decent sized animal. Yeah.
Yeah.
They estimated a weight of 550 pounds to 250 kilograms. And it is in the group of crocodiliforms known as the Nodosuchians, which we talked about in terrestrial crocs quite a bit.
We did.
Specifically the Pyrosauridae, which is exciting because it makes it the youngest and southernmost member for this group.
Oh, cool.
So it is expanding our range and age of what we know about Nodosuchians, specifically this group of Nodosuchians. When they looked at where it fell out among its group, it fell in among similarly shaped pyrosaurids, all having broad, robust snouts, big, powerful jaws for being predators. Many of these lived also toward the end of the Cretaceous, about the same age as this one. This one is so complete that it allowed them to get a really nice look at its anatomy, and it was the first time we've gotten such a nice look at one of these pyrosaurids.
Okay.
So they've been able to get some good info about its anatomy that we hadn't really been able to get about previous species. It has big xiphidont teeth, so those are compressed and serrated.
Yeah, knife-shaped.
Yes, exactly. Good for cutting flesh. It has broad snout and a relatively short snout. So like the snout part, the front part of the face, is only a little bit more than 50% the length of the overall skull.
Okay, so as opposed to modern crocs, where it's mostly snout.
Exactly, and a small back of the head comparatively. This is a very short, very, carnivorous, canine almost shaped head.
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds more like a wolf's skull.
Exactly. They also noted strong abductor muscle, so it probably had a very powerful bite. All signs pointing to hypercarnivorous. It also, in addition to that, it had strong forelimbs with broad shoulder blades, so it also looked like it might have been using those as like a tool for catching prey, to wrestle prey down, maybe.
Okay, so like a big cat.
Yeah, exactly. They compared it to big cat in the article, and yeah, this seems like it was a very specialized predator, active predator. So not only is it a cool animal, is it the youngest and southernmost, it's also one of the best preserved for this kind of Nodosuchian and Pyrosaurid. So just a really nice addition to the fossil record of crocodiliforms and first for this area.
Yeah, and a fun addition to the diversity of ancient terrestrial crocs. We did terrestrial crocs was episode 220, and we talked about a bunch of that diversity. The idea that you had terrestrial crocodiliforms occupying similar niches to a bunch of our modern land predators is
Hmm.
very cool.
Well, and the idea that, like, I'd never, and this is me, big old croc fan over here, I'd never considered them using their front limbs for prey capture.
Well, because modern day reptiles tend not to. That's not
Yeah.
really like the front legs are pretty much always for walking, if that.
Yes. And so, like, and it could have been one of those where it may have just been for pinning. They're not like catching like a cat, but even just holding down prey so that then you can go in for the bite. But that's still, I hadn't thought about a predatory one having strong front limbs to handle the prey in some way.
Yeah,
That's very cool.
very cool stuff. Well, speaking of new species of armored Mesozoic reptiles, I also brought along a new species of one of those. This is news about a new species of ankylosaur, the armored dinosaurs, that was doing something wholly unexpected with its armor.
Oh, I did. I saw like
Did you see the pictures of
I
this
saw
one?
like a picture and I had a moment of, is that picture real or is that like the AI generated picture
it
tying
it
things up?
looks fake. Right? You see the
Yeah.
picture and you're like, oh, somebody made up a dinosaur for like a video game or something. Nope,
Yeah.
that's this
Oh,
animal. This
I'm
is
ready.
research by Susanna Maidment et al. In Nature, and in the blog post we will link to an article by Sarah Hashemi in Smithsonian Magazine. This ankylosaur, so ankylosaurs, the armored dinosaurs, the ones that have the rows of scutes and plates along the back, many of them have tail clubs, Ankylosaurus being an example. This is an ankylosaur named Spicomelis afer, which is from the late Jurassic of Morocco. It was originally published. I said it was a new species, and I lied because I forgot about that part. Originally, this species was published in 2021, so a few years ago, but that identification was based on a single partial rib. That rib was
Oh.
found. Sounds like it was purchased somewhere. Like a fossil dealer had this rib, and the scientists got a hold of it, and they were able to publish the species because the rib was so odd. The rib
Mm.
had spines fused directly to it. So it was a rib with just like big spikes coming off,
Oh, wow.
which is odd even for ankylosaurs.
Yeah.
They identified it as an ankylosaur, but one partial rib is not very much to go on. So there were some questions about that identification, especially because if this is an ankylosaur, it is the first one known from Africa and at late Jurassic, about 165 million years old, the oldest known ankylosaur. Ankylosaurs were
Wow.
mostly, episode 69, ankylosaurs were a Cretaceous group. So if this is an ankylosaur, it's in a new place and a new time, which is very cool.
I had forgotten the Africa note. That's very exciting.
So in 2023, researchers excavating in the same rocks that this one came from, which are in the Middle Atlas Mountains of Morocco, found a much more complete specimen, including elaborate armor. This confirms it as the oldest known ankylosaur, the first one known from Africa. With enough of the skeleton, this is an ankylosaur. It is moderately sized. The whole animal is estimated to be about 4 meters or 13 feet long.
Okay.
So it's in an unusual place and an unusual time. Being the oldest known ankylosaur also means it can give us some clues to the early evolution of this group. What did the earliest ankylosaurs look like? And this creature does not look like what we would expect the oldest ankylosaurs to look like. Its armor is wacky. It has both. So if you picture Ankylosaurus, right? They've got these big knobs on along the back. Some ankylosaurs have like spikes, like Sauropelta has those spikes coming off the
Yes.
shoulders, but they tend to be very knobbly.
Hmm.
Spicomelis is spiky in a way that ankylosaurs typically are not. It has bony spikes sticking off of all of its ribs. It has big spikes coming up over the hips, long blade-like spikes and plates along the body. Around the neck, it has particularly large spikes that are up to 87 centimeters long, and
Whoa.
that's just the bone, not including the sheath that probably was over it in life. So these were like 3 or 4 foot long spikes in a collar around the neck.
Jeez.
These are all osteoderms. So these are bones that have developed into these spiky shapes. The tail, interestingly, is not complete. So we don't have the full to the end of the tail, but some of the vertebrae that we have are fused in the way we see in later ankylosaurs that have tail weapons,
Yes.
which is another surprise because tail weapons are only known from that one branch of ankylosaurs in the late Cretaceous. One would have
Yeah.
expected that that was something that evolved later on. All of this is interesting because this is way more ornate and complicated and impressive than other ankylosaur armor, which is kind of the opposite of what we might expect from the pattern of ankylosaur evolution. You'd expect that it started off as simple armor and then became more extravagant later on. The fact that this extravagant armor is seen in what is so far the oldest known ankylosaur suggests that it was probably doing something different with its armor.
Yes.
The authors discuss that most likely this ostentatious amount of armor was probably being used for display.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? We see these kinds of wild display features in all sorts of animals. That obviously has defensive utility because you're covered in spikes, but that display might have been as much or more important for these animals, and that over time, ankylosaurs might have reduced and simplified the armor, either because defense became more important as
Mm-hmm.
big predators lived in the same habitats or something, and they could no longer afford to have they had to put form over or function over form, or that they might have started evolving alternative behaviors to display, like if they
Mm-hmm.
were shifting towards combat as a method of defending territory or competing for mates instead of display. Again, it might have been, we don't need these big spikes, and in fact it would be really nice to have solid armor because
Yes.
now I'm getting hit by ankylosaur tail clubs.
Yeah.
It's such a cool, the way that you described it, absolutely. The
Mm-hmm.
pictures of it look like you asked AI to generate an image of a cool armored dinosaur.
Yes. They're so extreme. Well, and I wonder if this individual is more likely to be a situation where early ankylosaurs were much more different than we thought, or have we not found other early ankylosaurs and turns out they were what we would expect. This was the bird of paradise ankylosaur.
Right, because it's also the
This
first one from Africa. Is
Yes,
this like
exactly.
an offshoot of the
Yes.
ankylosaur family that went to live somewhere new and then did something that no other groups did?
Yeah, and that's why we don't see any signs of this stuff in the ones we know. Because yeah, it absolutely sounds like display. Whenever especially just the lengths and extreme features, those all lean very heavily in my mind toward sexual selection of long spine
Yes.
better, longer spine better. Like
Well, because if it's defense, you don't need a meter long spike to defend your neck
yes,
from
exactly.
getting bitten by something. Like
Well, it's
that,
it's
all you need is some knobs.
Yeah, it's what we go over all the time of like, I'm sure it could be possible for an animal to run 100 miles an hour, but that's a ridiculous speed for them to run. Like, yes, this probably is super defensive, but a 6 inch or foot long spine would have also done the job.
Yes. This is what you do when you need to be spotted across the forest by your fellow ankylosaurs and show off how cool you are.
Absolutely
It's
awesome.
so cool. Check out, we'll put the link in the blog post so you can follow that link and check out the images because it is just wild looking.
Well, for my next news, speaking of new species of armored Mesozoic reptiles, this is a new species of sea turtle from Syria.
I figured it was a marine reptile when you mentioned bits before.
This one's not actually Mesozoic, but it almost is. It's 50 million years old.
Which is a lot of lies in this
Yes. Yep.
news section.
Yep. I just realized that when I was looking at it, the deposits that they were talking about dated to the Cretaceous, but then I looked at the age and I'm like, oh, that's not Cretaceous. This is research by Wafa Al-Halabi et al. In Papers in Paleontology, and the article is a press release from SciTech Daily. This new species is from Syria, where fossil turtles have been known before. Fossil turtles have been found in deposits from the Cretaceous and across Syria, but typically were very fragmentary, broken apart. This new species is a really well preserved specimen, which is part of why it's exciting. This is Seriames leilunensis. It was found near the city of Afrin and was found back in 2010, and it is a cool situation. It is an inner cast of the shell. So endocast, so like when we get an endocast of a clamshell, but this is the inner cast of the inside of the turtle shell.
Yeah, so the shell got filled in with sediment that is now
Yes.
a rock in the shape of the inside of the turtle shell.
Yes. And it also preserved parts of the backbone, pelvis, and hind limbs, and some of those are enclosed in the endocast.
Cool.
All right, for some reason that's very cool to me. The shell is oval in shaped and about 53 centimeters long and 44 centimeters wide. So not a chunky sea turtle.
About half as long as one of the neck spikes of Spicomelus.
Yes. And I don't know if we have any indication whether or not it seems like this could have been a younger sea turtle, but we do have like sea turtles that are like the Kemp's Ridley is a fairly small sea turtle. So we do have smaller sea turtles still alive today. Looking at the surrounding sediment, they dissolve the sediment to look at the foraminifera, the little shelly fossils in the sediment, and got an age of early Eocene, 50 million years old. This turtle is from the Pleurodira clade, specifically the clade Stereogenini, which is an extinct group of side-necked turtles. So side-necked turtles are known from like South America and Australia. These are the alternative to what many of us here in the northern hemisphere think of turtles that pull their necks straight back into the shell. They wrap their neck off to the side. Snake neck turtles are a famous example of these. Today, all of our side neck turtles are semi-aquatic and freshwater. This was a saltwater member of this group.
Ooh.
So it was a sea turtle, but not a sea turtle by what we think of today. It was a sea-going side-necked turtle.
Yeah, it was a turtle of the sea.
Yes, exactly. Which is something that, as we mentioned back in the Turtles episode, and
episode 60 for turtles.
Yeah, there was a bunch of different marine-going turtles. So this is another example. Much like our croc earlier, this is a new geographic location for this clade of side-neck turtles, and it is also the earliest evidence of this group.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so just once again, pushing the boundaries of both region and age, and it pushes back their origin by more than 10 million years than the next oldest member of this group. And this is just a fun note, it is the first and so far currently only vertebrate fossil formally described from Syria.
Interesting.
That has been given a name and fully described. I think there might be others that haven't been described yet. So like there's probably others that have been found, but this is the first one to get a name.
Wow. Way to go, Syria.
Yeah.
On the map.
Yes.
Well, that's very cool. There has been a trend in the last decades or so that every now and then you'll have a country that either some type of fossil that's never been found there is found, or something gets named, or sometimes paleontological work is done in-house, so to speak, by researchers in that country, where you have a lot of countries. Africa and the Middle East and Asia have a lot of places like this, where you have countries where paleontology has been going on for a long time, but from outside.
Yes.
Scientists
Exactly.
from Europe or the United States have been going there, collecting fossils, bringing them back, and then describing them. It's becoming more common in various countries for people in that country to be the ones doing that work, for new
Yeah.
species to be being named from places that they haven't been named before. And the field of paleontology gets bigger and
Yes.
expands, and that's really cool to see.
Yeah. So yeah, that's exciting. And there's my marine reptile for this month.
Well, speaking of new species of armored reptiles from the Mesozoic, my last bit of news has nothing to do with any of that.
Here's a bird from today.
Here's a bird from yesterday. It is actually aquatic things. This is research about the evolution of cave fish.
Cool.
This is research by Chase Brownstein et al. In Molecular Biology and Evolution, and in the blog post we will link to a press release on Science Daily from Yale University. Cave fish. We talked about this in episode 112 when we talked about caves. There are a bunch of groups of fish that have adapted to life in caves. They tend to be small, they're often unpigmented, they often have reduced eyes. They live in the underground waterways of sunken cave systems. There are some famous groups of fish that have done this, right? The Mexican cave fish are a really famous example, but this has happened many times in different lineages.
Yes.
This research is focused on a group called the amblyopsids, which are cave fish that live in the eastern United States. So the caves that you get in like the southern Appalachians and Florida, places like that, have this group of cave fish. These cave fish tend to have long bodies, flat heads, reduced pelvic fins, and highly reduced eyes. The eyes are, in some cases, completely absent, in other places, just very small, because as we've discussed before, if you live in a cave, you don't need those eyes very much.
It's funny because you talked about them having similar features, and as you listed off their features, that's already the image I had in my head, and I had not heard of these fish until you mentioned them just now, because
Yep.
that's what a cave fish looks like.
That's what a cave fish looks like. This research, they used genetic analysis and fossils to construct the evolutionary history of these fish. So these fish are still around. Fossils and genetics to put together an evolutionary family tree to determine patterns of evolution over time. They concluded that the ancestors of these amblyopsid cave fish were probably similar to a group of closely related fish that are called swamp fish. And the
Ooh.
swamp fish have a very similar body shape, and they aren't eyeless, but they have some low light adaptations for getting around in dim conditions. And so they're suggesting most of the physical features that make these cave fish what they are were probably already present in their ancestors who were living in swamps or some sort of kind of similar environment that they were then able to relatively easily shift over into caves.
That makes a lot of sense.
The genetic analysis was also able to zero in on some of the mutations involved in eye reduction. So, what tweaks were going on in the genome that led to the loss of eyes? And what they found is that different lineages of this group of cavefish have completely different mutations that led to the reduction of their eyes, which suggests that eyes became reduced at least 4 different times in this group, which suggests that they moved into caves at least 4 different times.
Yeah.
So not only has cave fish evolved in many different groups, within just this eastern United States group of cave fish, it has evolved multiple times. And then they did an extra cool thing, which is using an estimation of how long, the rates of mutation. They attempted to predict how long ago that reduction of the eyes began to try to get an idea of when did they move into caves.
Cool.
Now, the range of estimates is pretty wide. So, for the varying lineages, it was between 1.5 to 7 million years. The oldest estimates for the earliest diverging lineage are as far back as 11 million years ago. These are, it sounds like there's like pretty wide error bars, so we don't have an exact number, but these are interesting for two reasons. One, Mexican cave fishes, which are extremely well studied, are much younger than that. The estimates for when they originated are often less than 500,000 years. So
Yeah.
it seems that these eastern US cave fishes are a much older cave lineage. And the other thing that is really cool is that these numbers provide age estimates for the caves. That
Right.
when the fish adapted to live in caves is a minimum age estimate for the cave systems, which is really cool because it's really hard to date ancient cave systems.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I also love the taking that to an extreme conclusion of you're not really a cave until you have cave fish, you know? Like
Right? That's one of the diagnostic features.
Yeah.
Yep. There's some newly formed caves in a mountain somewhere, and the other caves are like, no, not yet.
So how are your cave fish doing? I don't have those. Oh, all right, you'll get there. You'll get there.
We recognize you as a hole in the ground, but we do not yet grant you the title
Yes.
of cave.
Yep. This is outrageous. I'm a dry cave.
Other fun notes, they point out that a number of the mutations that they observe in these fish are similar to some mutations known in humans that cause like eye diseases and such. And so I was looking, they mentioned that the caves are in the eastern United States. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I wonder if they list like the specific locations because we're in the southeastern US and where we live has a lot of caves. So I went to look. It's like, oh, are you looking in certain areas? And they do mention the Cumberland Plateau and the Valley and Ridge province. Also, because I was looking for it, the Gray Fossil Site gets a mention in this paper because they're talking about the karst environments of that region of the country. And
Yeah.
they're looking at ages. Some of their ages for estimating these cavefish are older than the Gray Fossil Site, which suggests that these fish could have been around at that time in maybe places not too far off from that sinkhole.
So we need to ask them what our llama and sloth look like.
Well, they wouldn't know. They couldn't see him.
Yeah, right, right. It sounded tall.
Sounded real tall. I don't know, man.
That's cool.
Very cool stuff. That's the news. And that's all I have to say about that. Let's move on to the main episode discussion. After this short musical interlude, we will talk about maybe the most famous recently extinct species that there is, dodos. As we have discussed on the podcast many times, there are lots of famous extinct animals.
Mm-hmm.
Right? T-Rex is extremely famous. Saber-toothed cats are extremely famous. But as far as historically extinct species, animals that have gone extinct in the last number of centuries, that humans, modern humans, civilized, in our modern style of living, interacted with before they went extinct, there probably is not a more famous example than dodos.
Yeah, especially like as being famous for being extinct.
Yes, they are the mascot of modern extinction.
Yes.
They are famous. They are in literature. They're in the colloquial language.
Gone the way of the dodo.
We refer to dodos. They are more famous even than things like thylacines or passenger pigeons. Just about everybody knows that dodos were around, they were a bird, and they went extinct not particularly long ago.
Yes.
Dodos are a species, the species Rhaphis cuculatus. When they were around, they were large, flightless, island-dwelling birds. They lived exclusively, they were endemic to the island of Mauritius, which is located in the Indian Ocean. We'll get into the sort of scientific details of dodos as a species, but one of the most interesting and exciting things about dodos is their historical context. So let's start by going through the history of humans and dodos. This is one of the few species here on the podcast that is an extinct species that we can talk about their interactions with humans.
Yes.
Dodos were endemic to the island of Mauritius. Mauritius is part of the Mascarene Islands, which is a series of volcanic islands located in the Indian Ocean, several hundred kilometers to the east of Madagascar, which is the closest larger landmass.
Okay, that helps put it in perspective, because I have never actually known where they were.
Yeah, I think for whatever reason in my head, I always imagined them as sort of near South America.
Yep.
And I don't know why that's the case, but I think that's
Yeah.
just sort of if I had been asked to guess and I didn't know where Mauritius was. The Mascarene Islands include a number of major islands. Mauritius is one. There's also Reunion and Rodriguez. Mauritius itself, the island, is about 1,800 square kilometers. So for those of us here in the United States, that's about half the size of Rhode Island.
Okay.
So this is not, for those of you outside of the United States, Rhode Island is the state that we use when we want to compare to small things.
Yes.
So this is not a particularly large landmass. It's also not terribly old. These are volcanic islands, so they were only formed geologically recently. Mauritius is estimated to be somewhere between 5 and 10 million years old.
All right.
Slightly confusingly, Mauritius is also the name of a country, which includes the island of Mauritius as well as some other nearby islands, but it is not the same as Mascarene Islands.
Yeah.
So Mauritius is also a nation. The island of Mauritius is where most of the people in this nation live. Mauritius has a population of a little over 1 million people. So the island of Mauritius is part of the Mascarene Islands. It is also part of the nation of Mauritius.
We got a lot of Venn diagrams already starting to.
There's some Venn diagrams, but fortunately, we're going to be focusing on farther back in time, and then on birds.
Yes.
So, with apologies to the lovely people of Mauritius. Now, interestingly enough, this island does not have a very long history of humans showing up on this island. Right, humans went all over the world, but like a lot of islands, this is a place that we missed for most of our history. The oldest documented human visitors to this island that I've seen referenced in a number of places are Arab traders trading, across the seas that are thought to have visited the island as early as the 1200s. Later, Portuguese traders visited the island in the early 1500s, but none of them settled on the island.
Gotcha.
It wasn't until the late 1500s and then into the early 1600s that Dutch traders started using the island as a port. It was used as a port for the Dutch East India Company.
Oh, okay.
And then eventually they set up a settlement on the island. It was occupied for a number of decades, abandoned for a bit, then returned to, and eventually became a lot of farmers lived there, along with servants, also enslaved people, because that is an important part of the history, especially in this part of the world. Yep. A lot of the reports of wildlife and such on Mauritius during these early decades of human occupation are coming from sailors or farmers, but also from enslaved people and servants who were taken to the island. The first recorded mention of dodos comes from Dutch mariners in 1598. That is the first time that somebody wrote down dodo. After that, there's a variety of descriptions that were given by a variety of people. Some of these descriptions, it's funny, like reading through, because some of them are like, this was a farmer or this was an engineer who was working here. And others are like, this description was written by a marooned sailor who got stuck on the island, or someone was one of the reports I read was from an exile who I
Oh,
think
wow.
might have been exiled to the island. So like there's a lot of fun different perspectives.
I love the idea for both of those last two of them having this incredibly dramatic life, and we're like, but most importantly, they saw a dodo.
But they saw Dodo. Well, and
That's what
I
we're going to
have
talk
to.
about.
The image in my head is that some dude is like washed up on the beach with a bunch of driftwood that's left from his ship, and he's like face down, and he opens his eyes and he looks up, and there's a dodo,
Just staring at him.
and he, ah!
And he goes, I have to draw you.
Now, because so many different people were writing these reports, and because most of these people had far more important things to worry about than accurately describing the native wildlife, these descriptions are often very imprecise. They're often contradictory.
Yeah.
Some of them were later copied or misrepresented. There were no scientists
Yes.
describing dodos on these islands. In fact, scientists as we understand them today never interacted with dodos.
Which is so insane.
Naturalists never actually got to see dodos.
Yeah, we historical naturalists missed this one.
Yes.
And that's so crazy and deeply frustrating.
It was so close.
Oh.
Dodos in these early reports are generally described as large flightless birds. Large, not like ostrich large, but like wild turkey, wild
Yeah.
hen, bigger than that, but not quite like ostrich or emu.
Yes.
Large bodied, tiny wings. They were clearly not flying. A large beak. Also what is often described as a half naked head.
Right.
So
Featherless.
dodos, yeah, featherless. The face and the beak are featherless, but the back of the head has feathers on it, which gives them a appearance like they're wearing a hood, which is actually what the species, I think that's what the species epithet cuculatus means, hooded, because it looks like they're wearing like a feather hood.
Yeah. It's one of those where like I feel like this is going to happen a lot in this episode because dodos are so charismatic and I've been seeing them depicted my whole life. Like they're in Alice in Wonderland.
Yep.
Like
they're in Ice Age, they're all over the place.
I've been seeing the pictures of them and cartoons of them since I was a kid that I was just like, well, yeah, that's what a dodo looks like. And because I haven't been able to like observe one myself, I haven't questioned the oddities of some of their features. Yeah, I had never really noticed, even though I knew that that was true. Interesting.
Yeah, dodos are strange looking birds.
They are.
They're also often described as being round, often as fat or slow. And this is how they're often depicted when we see them in movies and stuff, is that they're just these chubby, squat, waddling birds.
Yeah, don't. Just
the origin of the word dodo, as far as I can tell, is not 100% clear. One potential origin for it is a Dutch word that means fat butt. Like a rude word in Dutch, which at least is similar to the word dodo.
Oh, that makes me very happy.
Now, most of human interactions with dodos took place on Mauritius, where the dodos live. There were a handful of dodos taken off the island.
Oh.
At least one dodo was exhibited live in London in like the 1630s, and various dodo specimens ended up in museums.
Wow.
So there wasn't like a big trade in dodos, and it's not like someone made a dodo zoo, but at least a handful of either living or pieces of dodos were taken off the island and sort of circulated around.
Cool.
Most of what ended up in museums were partial remains. In fact, it sounds like mostly they are either heads or feet.
Gotcha.
To this day, there are no complete specimens of dodos collected from when they were alive.
Yep. I learned that from watching a Adam Savage YouTube video where he was making a model of a dodo skeleton because like that's just been a side fixation of his. And he casually was like, yeah, since we don't have a complete skeleton. And I was like, surely that's not correct. And I looked it up and was like, how do it's so frustrating.
Yep. So they were interesting enough that people circulated them around a bit. Some specimens ended up in museums, but they weren't particularly well studied or well collected. Most of what we have is just written reports.
Crazy.
And then they went extinct. Within 100 years
Oof.
of those first reports written about dodos, they were gone. Dodos went extinct in the 1600s. By the end of the 1700s, people generally agreed that the dodos were gone.
Wow.
This is really interesting historically because this is not long into the scientific understanding that extinction is even a thing that can happen.
Yeah.
Dodos were one of the very first species that humans truly recognized had become extinct, and especially one of the first extinct species we recognized outside the fossil record.
Yes.
This was one of the first times we watched a species go extinct.
I got the morbidly funny image of there being some holdout extinction deniers. They're like, I don't know, this concept's just not that convincing. And then reading the paper about the Dodos and going, well, you got me.
Whoops.
I'm convinced.
Well, funnily enough, you'll like this next part. For a while, because dodos were gone and all there was left of them were like those little bits and pieces of remains and old reports, and because they're such weird birds, there was a time where some experts considered them to be myths.
Yeah.
Where some people were like, no,
Whoa.
this is made up. This doesn't exist.
Yeah, of course sailors have been talking about their crazy island birds.
Yeah, what you got some pictures that some marooned sailor drew and described this bird. And we didn't have bodies to show around. So in some circles they were considered mythological.
I thought that you were going to say that like what happened with the thylacine, that they became cryptids, of people being like, no, surely check all the other islands. No, a step further, that they were mythical for a second.
Yes.
That is both extremely cool and also extra adds to the frustration of
how quickly we forget.
Well, it's like we almost fully lost this animal. Not only extinct, but to where we almost forgot about it. This means we were so close to just not knowing dodos were actually a thing, period. And that's insane.
Yep. Now, there has been a lot written about the question of when exactly dodos went extinct and why exactly dodos went extinct. There are various reports or documented sightings of dodos between that first mention in 1598 and 1638. For those 40 years, there are a handful, scattered reports here and there documenting what little we know about dodos. After that, there are a handful more sightings, some as late as the 1680s, right, almost into the next century, but the later ones these days are generally considered probably mistakes.
Okay.
Because dodos were not the only large flightless birds on Mauritius. And one of the other confusing things about having reports coming from so many different people, so many different lifestyles, also people that spoke different languages, is that it can be difficult to tell what species they're discussing. Because, the sailors and the farmers did not do detailed taxonomic analysis. They were like, oh, that's one of the big birds. That must be the dodos that I've been hearing about.
Yep. Or I could see there being situations where it's like, oh yeah, that's and insert quick name or description of bird, and we all know which bird that is, so I don't need to go into any further detail. Like, what other bird would I be talking about, silly?
Yeah, that's a daddy longlegs. We all know what we're talking about.
And we all have the same image in our head right now, no questions, absolutely.
So the later sightings are thought by modern day scientists to have probably more likely been red rails, which
Okay.
were another bird native to Mauritius, also extinct now. The latest report that is generally accepted as this seems to be the latest confirmed sighting of a dodo is from 1662. And it comes from actually not mainland Mauritius, but a small offshore islet, a little island off of Mauritius. Later on, researchers would try to use, here's all the sightings over time. Let's run a statistics analysis to see if we can predict the decline and when they might have gone extinct. Research like this, some suggest that dodos might have survived as late as the 1690s. So often you'll see the extinction date of dodos listed as somewhere between 1662 and 1690, or 1693 sometimes comes up. Somewhere in the second half of the 1600s, dodos went extinct. Some researchers have suggested that because the last sighting was on an offshore small island, that maybe they persisted on the small islands for a while, although there's not clear evidence whether or not that's true. So, humans wrote down that they saw a dodo for the first time in 1598, and within 100 years, dodos were gone. They had become fully extinct.
Just about within one person's lifetime.
Yes, absolutely. You could have lived your entire life. Oof. Yeah,
Ugh.
that's the first and last reported sightings of a dodo are only 64 years apart.
Yeah.
That's ugh.
Oh.
Now, one of the other reasons why dodos have become so famous as an extinct species is because they were one of the first cases of an extinction that was very clearly our fault.
Yes.
We did this. Dodos lived on that island for who knows how long, hundreds of thousands of years, and then humans settled the island, and half a century later, dodos were gone. Now, the common when we ask why did dodos go extinct, the common answer, and the answer that comes up a lot, and the answer that comes to my mind first, is always overhunting.
Yeah.
Humans came to the island, needed something to eat, and hunted and ate dodos. This is probably not what actually drove them extinct, because as far as we can tell, humans didn't do a lot of dodo hunting.
Mm-hmm.
It happened. There were reports that describe like how to cook dodo meat and how the dodo meat tastes. People absolutely got there and went, I'm going to put that in my mouth. Let's see what it's like.
Mm-hmm.
But in the 1600s, human populations on the island were fairly small, mostly restricted to the coasts. There aren't any reports that describe dodos as a particularly major food source. And there are archaeological sites that have been investigated on the island that don't have dodos remains, which suggests that people were not bringing dodos for food or for any other purpose to their settlements. Even habitat destruction, right, like deforestation on the island, was pretty limited within that first century and mostly near the coast. So humans hunting and eating dodos and cutting down trees certainly didn't help,
Yes.
but is not generally considered to have been a primary driver of why dodos went extinct. You'll often hear the stories, humans showed up there and dodos didn't know to avoid them because they live on an island without native predators. And that seems to be true. There are reports of people like walking up to dodos and other birds on Mauritius and just hitting them. Because you grab. Although there are also reports of the birds running away and fleeing because, everything has some amount of survival instinct.
Well, and it is not a difficult behavior to learn of, oh, it's one of those, I'm gonna run away.
Yes.
Like that is a very quick things that animals become conditioned to of, the bad thing. I've learned to associate this with bad. Move away from bad.
Also, you have to imagine that a dodo has lived its entire life and then meets something several times its size
Yeah,
and goes,
right.
I'm gonna leave now. I thought I'd seen everything on this island. Maybe we run away.
It is so easy for us to forget. It's like, yeah, this was a big bird. It's like, yeah, but you're like just a kaiju by comparison to everything else on this
Yes.
island.
This bird, it was only about the size of a velociraptor. It wasn't very big.
Could dodos open doors?
We'll never know. Probably not. They had tiny little wings.
Yeah, right.
So, humans were probably not the direct cause of dodo extinction, but when humans came to Mauritius, they did not come alone. Humans introduced very early on a bunch of invasive species, notably goats, pigs, Javan deer, and crab-eating macaques.
Oh.
Which, between all of those species, A, populated in many cases very quickly, and ate vegetation, destroyed local habitats, ate a lot of probably the same food as the dodos were eating, and some of those, like the monkeys and the pigs, might have also fed on dodo eggs or dodo chicks. One of the most notorious invasive species on Mauritius are black rats.
Yep.
Black rats, I read one report that noted black rats were already a problem when Dutch settlers started setting up agriculture. That they might have actually been introduced earlier with some of those earlier visits. Yep. They might have already been there for centuries. All of, and again, Mauritius is less than 2,000 square kilometers. It doesn't take a whole lot of rats and pigs and deer to overtake this island.
Crazy.
And that is almost certainly the main driver of the extinction of dodos. Dodos, again, they had no native predators. And so and they didn't have a whole ton of competition on the island. It's limited space, limited resources. So the influx of a bunch of ravenous deer and goats and pigs and stuff really would have limited dodos' food availability and resource availability across the island. So, between all of these invasive species, some of the habitat destruction, and the occasional hungry human being, dodos did not survive more than several decades after humans came to the island. But at the same time, dodos were slowly becoming famous.
Yeah.
They would become famous later because, again, people recognize their extinction. And this is, it's an interesting case because, thylacines were last sighted back in the 1930s, and here we are almost 100 years later, and there's still lots of discussion about could they still be out there, and people have that sort of hope, like, oh, maybe they're still out there somewhere. I feel like the dodo is a really interesting case where it lived on one island.
Yes.
And it becomes very easy to feel like if they're on the island, like we haven't seen them in a couple hundred years, we can be pretty confident that they're not here anymore. And so that easy realization made them very famous. They also became famous because a painter named Roland Savory was in the habit of painting dodos. Back in the early 1600s, included dodos in at least 10 different paintings.
His dodo period.
It was his dodo period, and his paintings were dispersed quite widely. A lot of later images of dodos were based on this person's paintings.
Yeah.
And then, sometime later, in 1865, a man named Charles Dodgson, but better known as Lewis Carroll, wrote Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and included, as you mentioned before, a dodo in the book. Around that same time, in the mid to late 1800s, scientists started getting renewed interest in this species. So between, over these centuries, dodos became popular in art, they became popular in literature, and scientists started to get sort of the hankering to understand more about these birds. Those new scientific analyses started by looking at preserved specimens, the handful of specimens that were in museums. But then in the 1800s, we found fossils.
Yay!
And this is where most of our knowledge of dodos comes from, is from their fossilized remains, which is a wild thing to be true about an animal that not only did we meet this animal, we drove this animal extinct.
Yes. Yep. Like, we should have been able to study living specimens, and yet.
Whoops. There are a handful of examples of fossils of dodos being discovered. In 1860, what might be the earliest known example of a person finding dodo bones, a local botanist on Mauritius found leg bones in caves, and these are lava caves because it's a volcanic island. Those bones were later realized these appear to be dodos. Very famously, in the early 1900s, a naturalist named Louis Theroux found 3 skeletons in a cave on Mauritius that include the best preserved dodo skeletons ever found.
Nice.
But the most famous locality for dodo fossils is a place called Marosong. Marosong is a marshland that is located in the southeast part of Mauritius. It covers about 4.5 acres of space. It's a moderate marshland space. Located within a valley that collects water and sand that's eroding away from elsewhere, creates this marsh. And what's interesting about the marsh is that this section of the island is mostly dry. So this marsh is it's a damp spot in the otherwise dry habitats of this part of the island. In the 1860s, people were digging in the area. I believe they were digging for peat. They were trying to, dig up resources. And in 1865, people observed that there were bones there, fossilized bones within this marsh. Further investigation turned out to be a lagerstätten. This is an extremely well-preserved fossil locality. The bone bed itself is up to 0.5 meter thick. So there's, 1.5 foot deep worth of bones. Starting in the mid-1800s and until the early 1900s, fossils were excavated there and sent off around the world to be studied by such names as Richard Owen, who, episode 184. Also, I'm not going to get into it here, but there were some academic drama shenanigans with Owen, which is not a surprise. Go check out our Owen episode for more about the kind of guy this guy was. Eventually, excavations were ceased, and the marsh was apparently filled in as an effort to combat malaria. That's a lot of standing water, and it seems like this was an effort to get rid of mosquito habitat. But the fossils were rediscovered in 2005, and excavations on the site have continued again. So it was gone for almost a century, but researchers this century have rediscovered those fossils. In total, there are 5 different excavation sites that have been examined in this marsh that have yielded thousands of fossils. Radiocarbon dating suggests that these are just over 4,000 years old. The fossils include lots of plants, insects, snails, fungi that give us an idea of this forest community that lived there. And there are more than 20 different vertebrate species that have been found at this marsh on Mauritius, including skinks and fruit bats and several species of birds. There are at least 300 to 400 dodo individuals that have been excavated at this site. This site is by far our best resource for learning about dodos.
That's so cool.
Interestingly, the most common fossils at Marosong are giant tortoises, belonging to the genus Cylindraspis, which used to live on Mauritius and are also now extinct. The interpretation of this site is that because it was a marshland in an otherwise dry part of the island, animals were probably drawn here for water to get a drink or a bath or whatever they needed, and then got mired in the mud.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The reason that this is thought to be the case is because, in part, not only are the fossils very well preserved, but there is an over-representation of leg bones. And little bones like toes tend to be preserved really well. So it seems that these animals were getting their feet stuck, and those were preserving the best because they were getting stuck first. It would also explain why the most common animals found at this site are giant tortoises and large flightless birds,
Yep.
which are more likely to step in there and get stuck.
Fascinating. The fact that leg bones are the thing preserved really drives home what a horrible end.
Yeah, probably not great.
No, not the way I want to go.
So, dodos are gone. We have very little remaining from when we interacted with them, and what we do have is imprecise and contradictory. But it turns out that their home island is full of fossils. So, between those old reports and preserved specimens and fossil studies, we have been able to put together a much more complete picture of what dodos were like, their lifestyle, their relationships, and all that. We're going to take a short break, and then when we get back from the break, we'll talk about dodos. We'll talk about the dodos themselves.
Yay.
So let's begin with the question of where dodos fit on the bird family tree. What species are they related to? Dodos, as some of our listeners may know, are pigeons.
Yeah.
Dodos are members of the family Columbidae, which is doves and pigeons. This has been determined based on their anatomy, but also DNA.
Yeah.
We have dodo DNA that has been extracted from fossils, as well as those handful of preserved museum specimens. So we have a pretty good sense of, the genetic components of dodos. Within Columbidae, within the dove and pigeons family, they belong to a subfamily called Raphinae, which are old world doves and pigeons. This includes about 200 living species that are found across the Eastern Hemisphere. And then, more specifically than that, a tribe called Raphini, which includes a lot of ground-dwelling island birds.
Cool.
For example, this group includes crowned pigeons, pheasant pigeons, and thick-billed ground pigeons, which live on New Guinea and some nearby islands. It also includes Nicobar pigeons, which live across Southeast Asia, including Indonesian islands.
Cool.
The group also includes a bunch of recently extinct species, other recently extinct species, Tonga tooth-billed pigeons, Solomon Islands crested pigeons, and Henderson Island pigeons and spotted green pigeons, many of these also island species. And there's at least one member of this group that is ancient, the Zealandian dove, which is known from the Miocene of New Zealand, so millions of years old. There is also within this group one other extinct flightless species, the Viti-levu giant pigeon, which is known from Fiji. This was a flightless bird. It's from the Holocene, so it's ancient but not terribly ancient. And
Yes.
it was almost as big as dodos. It was a
Wow.
separate evolution of large flightless island pigeon.
So, but this was something kind of a trend among the dodos group, like its closest relatives. It was not a one-off weird big ground bird.
Nope.
There were other large, more ground-dwelling. That's. I'm always curious when it comes to island species like this. Of like, are you a weirdo because you're on an island, or is this what your group's good at?
Yes. And with birds, it's interesting because, a lot of these raphine birds are ground dwelling, but ground dwelling doesn't mean flightless.
Yes.
Right? Wild turkeys are ground dwelling. Pheasants are ground. There's tons of birds that are ground dwelling, but can still fly.
Yes.
And if you're good at being ground dwelling on an island, but you can still fly, you can go to all the islands.
Yes.
And this group seems to be really good at that in the Eastern Hemisphere, populating various islands, and at least a couple of times evolving large flightless species. The Fiji giant pigeon, the other flightless one, is, as it is often referred to, the third largest known pigeon. Interestingly, the largest living pigeons, which are, I think, Victoria crowned pigeons,
Okay.
are in this group.
Yeah.
Yeah, that species is like a few kilograms,
Yeah.
which is pretty, that's like the size of a house cat, right? Which is
Yes.
pretty big for a bird, but not terribly large. The VT Levu giant pigeon from Fiji, the third largest known pigeon. The first two are both in the subtribe Raphina, which are sometimes called the mascarene giant ground pigeons. There are two species in this subgroup, both very closely related: Rhaphis, the Dodos, and Pezophaps, the Rodriguez solitaires.
Oh.
These are both very large, flightless, island-dwelling birds. Both lived in the Mascarene Islands, likely split from each other around 20 to 30 million years ago, so a long history in this region. Dodos and solitaires are sister species. Dodos were not the only dodos, as it turns out. In the Mascarene Islands, they had a closely related species. I don't remember how far away those islands are, but like a few hundred kilometers away on another island, solitaires were endemic to the island of Rodriguez.
Don't worry, we have dodos at home. Picture solitaire. That's awesome.
Dodos at home. And even outside of this group of ground pigeons, these are not the only flightless island pigeons. There is at least one other example, the St. Helena dove, which is from St. Helena Island in the South Atlantic, which is known from fossils from the end of the Ice Age, about 14,000 years old, which also has a highly reduced wing and shoulder region and appears to have been a large flightless island-dwelling pigeon.
Whoa.
So pigeons have done this, and tons of birds have evolved flightless. We've talked about flightless ducks and flightless owls and all sorts of flightless birds. The pigeon and dove family has done this at least a couple times, and multiple times within this one group. The dodos are just the most famous and among the largest of these flightless pigeons.
It's neat just because like pigeons are a group that we humans have a very close connection to. So so often we only think of them from pigeons, which are feral domesticated doves. Like these are doves that we domesticated and then stopped caring about for some reason. And just they got released into our cities and around the world, and now we just have pigeon populations.
Interestingly enough, if I remember B's book correctly, the reason I think was chicken. Although I could be... Go read Pests by Bethany Brookshire. She explains why pigeons went from being beloved to being hated as pests.
Yeah, that make a lot of sense. So, but it's cool to get to see a little bit of like they are a complex group of animals, just like any group of animals. Here's an example where they're evidently really good at being island birds.
Yes.
That's awesome.
So, dodos themselves, we keep referring to them as large and flightless. Dodos were quite big. They stood about a meter tall. So, 3.5 feet tall, which is quite large for a bird.
Oh yeah, this is a bird that's going to be taller than most toddlers.
Yes.
Like this is a big bird.
This is a bird that'll fight your dog.
Yeah.
They mostly inhabited the the lowland forests of Mauritius, and they exhibit island gigantism. This is a common feature in island species, and particularly island birds becoming large and flightless. Before humans arrived, Mauritius had there were basically no mammals on Mauritius. The only mammals that visited the island were bats and seals or marine mammals that went by, and there were no large predatory reptiles or predatory birds. So dodos were about the biggest things around. Them and the giant tortoises and maybe some of the other local ground-dwelling birds were as big as it got. Now, exactly how heavy dodos were has been a subject of some debate. Reports from the 1600s often describe them as being quite large and heavy. There's a particular report from 1634 that says few weigh less than 50 pounds.
Wow.
Which is about 22 kilograms, which is the average weight of a rhea, which is a bigger flightless bird. So there have been doubts as to how accurate that actually is. There have been a variety of different estimates published in scientific literature. A number of studies have used the proportions of the femur to try to estimate the weight of the body, which is a pretty common technique. Those reports have variously concluded between 10 and 20 kilograms.
Okay.
Some more recent studies have used other leg bones or volumetric models, like trying to reconstruct the body and then estimate how much meat was there in there. And those more recent studies have concluded with numbers on the lower end, so 10 to 14 kilograms. And that is big. That's big for a bird, but that's like on the large end of wild turkeys.
Yeah.
It's not gigantic, right? It's still going to outweigh most wild turkeys. It's still, 10 to 14 kilograms is 25, 30 pounds. So it's not just taller than your toddler, it also weighs more than your toddler.
Yeah.
But not quite as hefty as a lot of reports and old depictions showed them. Some scientists have pointed out that the descriptions of dodos as being rotund or fat or extremely heavy might have been either exaggerated, might have been based on overfed individuals. But like if they're, I don't know anything about the one that was exhibited in London, but if they were overfeeding it, you could have gotten a big heavy one. But also that they have feathers, and it's possible that they puffed out their feathers either as an intimidation thing or during courtship or something, and maybe made themselves look bigger. Or it might just be that people were bad at estimating weights back then. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, yeah, just one of those where it's like, oh, no, trust me. I lift things for a living. I know what 50 pounds feels like.
That dodo gets bigger every time he tells that story.
Yeah, exactly. It's, and didn't factor in that it's like, yeah, but, we've been hauling things all day. We're tired. It feels heavy, whatever it is. What was I think this came up recently where you told the story of the person who saw an anaconda, was like, that's gotta be 40 feet long. Was like, yeah, because it ate something.
Yes.
This is much more reasonable because I did have in my head that they were these just boulders of bird.
And they are often depicted that way, maybe inaccurately.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, they are also stereotypically depicted as being sort of clumsy. They have sort of this waddle to them. But that also probably isn't true. There are reports of people who interacted with dodos describing them as being fast runners.
Yeah.
And I think there's at least one report that describes them as being hard to catch. It's like, I imagine it's like trying to catch a chicken.
Yes. Yep.
Right. Or a turkey. These are ground dwelling birds. They are going to be somewhat adept on the ground. Researchers have also noted that the hind legs are extremely similar to other pigeons.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be an indication that they were less mobile or less agile. They were probably pretty effective at moving around on the ground. There's also been some research into their histology to get a sense of their growth patterns. They appear to have grown very quickly, like a lot of birds do, but then slowed down as adults.
Yeah.
Which they probably could get away with because they live in a place where there aren't any predators, and also there's not that much resources. So you have to sort of pace yourself. So dodos, it's very interesting how many of those stereotypical depictions are, if not disproven, at least questioned when we look into more of what these birds were like. The other one that I don't have any particular data on is that dodos are also commonly depicted as being stupid.
Yep.
And this seems to come from this idea that dodos went extinct. Because again, when we first started to understand extinction, one of the most common ways for people to sort of rationalize and make sense of that is that animals that went extinct because they weren't good enough.
Yeah, they were a
Right.
failed experiment.
Something was wrong with them. And I always think of the dodos from Ice Age,
Yes.
who throw themselves into oblivion because they're depicted as being idiots. And, as we've discussed before, you can't tell an animal's intelligence from just its bones or even just from the reports of a handful of people in the 1600s. But there really isn't any reason to think dodos were any less intelligent than most birds.
Yep. Well, and I also wonder if their docile behavior just got
Yes.
interpreted as lack of intelligence, which is something that we note in island species that very often you see a lowered fight or flight because there's not a reason most of the time to fight or flight, because if there's no predators, then you're just chilling. So that instinct has just diluted over the generations, which I absolutely see how that could be interpreted of how stupid can you be to just let me come up next to you
Yes.
and to not avoid us, or to be so to be easy to hunt or whatnot, because you're viewing it from the mentality of what animals you're used to.
Yeah, I can easily see a situation where they got a reputation for being dumb because they didn't run away from threats, which was a misunderstanding of their biology, and then that reputation was reinforced by the fact that they became extinct,
Yep.
and the interpretation that, well, they must have not been well adapted, which is also a misunderstanding of how biology and extinction works. But that became ingrained in the social consciousness, even as we went on to learn more about how extinction happens and more about island evolution and more about dodos themselves. These were probably extremely cool. And I have more to say about their biology. These are cool birds.
Yeah. Well, and I think also they look kind of dopey. Like,
They do look weird. They're big, they're
yeah,
round, they've got that hooded head with the
well,
feathers going on.
kind of cartoony. They've got a big rounded hooked beak.
Yes.
Like they've got this very it makes sense that they were put into kids literature, because like, yeah,
Mhm.
they don't look like a hawk that's sharp angles and fierce eyes, or like owls that look very cool, but then when you watch them it's like, oh, you're just a dopey,
Right.
you're just a silly little guy. So I can also see how that would get portrayed of like, where it's like how pigs have often get portrayed as like lazy and stupid in cartoons, when actually they're very intelligent, because you look what we would define as fat and lazy, and so therefore you must fit the archetype.
hmm So there's been a bunch of research into the anatomy and adaptations of dodos. Surprisingly, and I've seen this mentioned in multiple papers, the skeleton of dodos overall is remarkably similar to other pigeons, including
Cool.
flighted pigeons. Like
Yeah.
most of the body just looks like a big pigeon body. There isn't really much that's different. The main places where there are difference are the wings and the skull.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The wings, of course, are small. If I understood the numbers I was reading correctly, proportionate to the body, dodo's wings are less than half the size of flying pigeons' wings because they're not using them
Yeah.
for flight. But the wing muscles are still quite substantial.
Interesting.
They still had powerful chest muscles for moving the wings, which probably means they were still using those wings for either display or fighting each other,
Yeah,
which are
yeah.
two things that modern pigeons do quite often. Modern pigeons will
Absolutely.
flutter the wings as a display. A lot of modern pigeons will smack each other with their wings when they're fighting for territory or whatnot. So
Yeah, yeah.
dodos probably were still getting a lot of use out of those small wings.
That's I well, it's like finding out that T-Rex's arm was actually quite muscled.
hmm
It's like, yeah, just because it's small doesn't mean it is a just fully vestigial feature. There's lots of other things you can continue to do with it.
Yeah.
That I was not expecting. That's very cool.
The other thing that's unusual about dodos is the skull.
Hmm.
Their skulls are quite large, very robust. As you mentioned, they have that hooked beak. Like at the tip, there is this distinct hook. In fact, one of the papers I was reading mentioned that early on, some scientists hypothesized that dodos might be related to vultures or birds of prey
Yeah.
because they've got that hooked beak.
Oh, and featherless face. Like,
Yep, which is very
if you
vulture.
if I knew nothing else about dodos and you just gave the physical description, part of me would absolutely have some money down on like, all right, carrion bird probably, because
Hmm.
ground dwelling also can fit for that. Like, makes a lot of sense.
Yep. The anatomy of the skull leads most scientists to generally agree that it was probably specialized for eating hard foods.
Yes.
There are also some reports from people who interacted with them that suggested that they might have eaten fruits or seeds. There's even some suspicions that they might have eaten crabs and snails and other sort of marine
Oh.
critters. So there doesn't seem to be any indication that they were, in fact, carrion feeders, but a big beak was probably good for crushing stuff, crushing
Yeah.
plant materials. And if they were pulling up crabs and things, they could have crushed those too. We don't have a lot of details because, again, we didn't study them.
Yep, no one cared about what they ate, just whether they could be eat. It does also make sense because, as you mentioned, islands don't have a huge amount of resources. Taking on tough foods is a great way to make use of the limited resources.
Yep. And also eating a variety of foods.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
When I read that there were suspicions of them eating, crabs and snails and stuff,
Mhm.
I was surprised because I hadn't heard that before. But then I was like, yeah, it would kind of be stupid not to if you
Yes,
live on an island.
these little bundles of protein crawling out of the water and around the
Yep.
ground, gobble them up.
Yes. Especially if you have a beak for crushing seeds and stuff. Like,
Yes.
yeah, you crush a crab.
Well,
Absolutely.
and
Get that food.
just scaling up a bird of that size, you're going to also so it also makes sense that there could have been a evolutionary parallel where it's like, well, started getting bigger, which means a bigger skull, which means inherently a stronger bite. Let's just lean into that
Hmm.
and bolster that further, and now you can really crunch into stuff. There, and once again, I like getting to interpret dodos as like, yeah, were they a semi durophagous giant island bird? That's awesome.
Yeah, they were very cool. There was a study in 2016 that actually looked at the endocast, the brain case of dodos, and found, again, mostly very similar to other pigeons.
Hmm.
But they
Hmm.
did note that dodos seem to have had an enlarged olfactory bulb. So they might have
Ooh.
had a good sense of smell, which might have been good for finding food, especially if they were going for like fruits and stuff that had, but that were recently ripened or beginning to spoil or whatever smell it is you want to find. It has also been pointed out that in addition to using their wings for disputes, a lot of pigeons also use their beaks. And
Yeah.
that big hooked beak might also have been useful for combat, for
Yeah.
competing with each other, for establishing territory or whatnot. So they might have been biting the heck out of each other.
Well, it the more and more we go over it of like, yeah, they are probably fairly mobile, which also makes sense because pigeons are very mobile ground birds. Like that is a feature. They were likely not as stupid as they are famously made out to be. They might have had still very strong wings and a powerful bite. We're probably very lucky they were docile island animals. Because,
Yeah.
like, a mainland dodo that had to fight off foxes and stuff would be so scary to deal with.
It's funny because we geek out about like shoebill storks. And we're
Yeah.
like, whoa, it's so cool. Dodos seemed like they
Yeah.
were pretty similarly cool.
Awesome.
Now, speaking of what dodos eat, this is a great little moment to have a small tangent about the dodo tree. This is a species of tree that is native to the island of Mauritius. The species is Sideroxylon grandiflorum, which nearly became extinct in recent centuries. Back in, I think this was the 70s, an ornithologist named Stanley Temple hypothesized that the tree might have almost gone extinct because it required dodos to be around to to activate the seeds. They pointed out that the fruits are very thick-walled, and their hypothesis was maybe they needed to be digested by dodos in order to germinate. This ornithologist did an experiment where he force-fed the seeds to a bunch of turkeys.
Oh no!
After which some of them did in fact germinate. This research has been challenged on the grounds that that there wasn't like a control group. You just force fed them to turkeys.
On the grounds of, dude.
On the grounds of, come on, man. But also because it has been shown that these seeds can just germinate without being digested.
Okay, yeah.
So probably it wasn't related to the dodo's extinction. It is a famous story because that does happen, where you'll lose an important species and then other things that relied on it. But the forces of deforestation and invasive species on the island were almost certainly much more influential in the loss of this tree.
As much as I want the dodos to be the ground sloths to the dodo tree avocados, I am not going to back the guy who force-fed turkeys.
No, that guy was mean to turkeys. Also, it's worth pointing out the ground sloth avocado thing also is not an agreed upon relationship. So it's rarely that straightforward and simple.
Yeah, there's a bunch like the pronghorns and American cheetah, and like there's a bunch of those that get passed around very regularly because they're extremely fun stories, and if true, are really cool examples of niches shifting and falling apart a bit because of an extinction, but they're also incredibly hard to confirm.
Yeah.
So they need to be taken as cool hypotheses that are worth looking into, not necessarily fossil gospel.
So dodos, very cool birds. We have a bunch of fossils to go on. We have put together some idea of their lifestyle. But as I mentioned, dodos are not the only members of their little group. They have a sister species. Over on the island of Rodriguez, the Rodriguez solitaire, Pezophaps solitaria.
The false dodo.
The other dodo. Solitaires were, because again, extinct, endemic to the island of Rodriguez, which is, 560 kilometers east of Mauritius. Now, Mauritius, I mentioned, is about half the size of Rhode Island. Rodriguez is just over 100 square kilometers, which makes it about half the size of Washington, D.C.
Okay, yeah.
This is a quite small island space. Solitaires were large and flightless, very similar in size and shape to dodos. I have seen that Fiji giant flightless pigeon referred to as the third largest of the pigeons. I don't think I have seen a definite ruling on whether the dodos or solitaires are number one. They were both large. I don't know that we have solid size estimates for solitaires, as they're not known quite as well as dodos.
It's going to be like theropod dinosaurs, where we're going to constantly get slightly bigger specimens of each.
Solitaires on Rodriguez became extinct in the 1700s, shortly after dodos did, once again, likely due to invasive species. The island of Rodriguez, I don't have information about its sort of history of being populated or settled, but I did see reports mention that Rodriguez was visited not infrequently by tortoise hunters. Which is another part of the story here that we're not covering, which is that giant tortoises were very frequently hunted.
Yes. Evidently delicious.
They are huge, so there's tons of meat there. They store really well.
Yep.
You don't have to feed them very much. So, like,
I remember hearing an anecdote of you just roll them on their back, and they'll just stay in the hold of the ship for however long it takes until you're ready to eat them.
Yep, which is one of the reasons why we have not very many giant tortoises left.
Yep.
There are no records, as far as I'm aware, of any solitaires ever being taken from the island, like the case was with Dodos. I don't know of any examples of people like taking solitaire souvenirs, but there are historical reports and thousands of bones known from caves on Rodriguez. So similar to Dodos, we've got a lot of skeletal evidence. Very similar to Dodos in a lot of regards. They seem to have lived in a similar environment, this dry forests and maybe scrubland. Reportedly, they were largely herbivorous, eating seeds and fruit and stuff like that. The most interesting features that have been interpreted and written about a lot with solitaires are related to their sexual and reproductive behavior. Solitaires apparently exhibit dramatic sexual dimorphism.
Oh.
Males seem to have been almost twice as big as females.
Wow.
Which, for birds, is almost the record. The only modern birds that have more dimorphism than that are I think some of the ratites.
Yeah.
Can have really dramatic differences. Reports from the time also suggest that males and females had different colors, which is not terribly surprising. I did see one paper point out that as far as they were aware, we don't actually know which ones are males and which ones are females. So one of the sexes is bigger, but among pigeons it tends to be males, so most likely males were the bigger ones.
Yes.
Reports from the time also describe solitaires as being quite aggressive while incubating and rearing their young. So very protective, very defensive is probably a better term than aggressive.
Yes.
And as part of this aggressive defensive behavior, descriptions reported the most exciting and interesting thing about solitaires, that they have wing weapons. Early reports from people who saw them described a bony growth on the wing that contemporary reports refer to as a musket ball or a bullet. And later research looking at the skeletons found that they do have a big knob on, specifically it's on the carpometacarpus, which is like wrist into hand bones.
Yeah.
Also, reports describe them flapping their wings and making a lot of noise, which pigeons do. This is a thing that's notable about pigeons, is that when pigeons flap, they have very noisy wings. Like when a pigeon takes off, it's a These birds would apparently flap, and the noise they made was described in reports as like a rattle or like thunder.
Whoa.
And one of the people wrote, I think these were like the maroon sailor and the exiled Huguenot or something. One of them described that the sound of them flapping their wings could be heard 200 paces away.
Cool.
It is unclear if they were banging their wing knobs together or against their body or what, but probably they were using them as noisemakers.
That's awesome.
So carpal weapons, so like wrist weapons, are not at all unheard of in birds. There are tons of birds that have this. Some ducks, some geese, jacanas have these. Other pigeons are known to have these. In some species, these are like a little knob, like a fist, like a little fist sticking off of the wing. Others, they are full-on spikes.
Yeah.
In some birds, it's like a little blade that they've got coming off of the wrist. These are often used for combat. They're often used to smack each other during some sort of dispute with other members of their species. As I mentioned before, pigeons and doves often do whack each other with their wings, whether they have wrist weapons or not. They often use them as noisemakers. So this seems to just be an exaggeration of a thing that a lot of pigeons and doves already do.
Cool.
Further research into the bones of solitaires have found that the knobs seem to be larger in the larger sexes, larger in probably the males, and also seem to develop after maturity.
Yep.
Which makes sense if this is something they're doing along with courtship or defending nests or whatever it is they're using them for as adults. Research has also noted that the wing bones and muscles of solitaires are larger and more robust than in dodos. So dodos already had fairly strong wings for how small they are. Solitaires had even more powerful wings, and it has been noted that among solitaires, healed injuries are very common on the wings and shoulders.
Whoa!
There was one study that did a survey of, I think it was like 100 and something, like a little over 100 individual solitaire remains, and found that healed injuries were present on 14% of the
Wow!
specimens that they looked at. So it seems to probably these birds were fighting each other with their big wing knobs.
Yeah, just beating each other. Man, solitaires, the fighting dodos.
The fighting dodos.
I want a Pokemon.
I was gonna say, yeah, this is a fighting type Pokemon.
Yeah, that's got big old knobbly fists off of its wings, and like just oh man, I want it to be like a Kingsbury boxing
Fisticuffs.
bird Pokemon. Yes, exactly. With the perpetual black eye. Like, oh, this is awesome.
Interestingly enough, I saw it mentioned in papers that wrist knobs, like these carpal weapons, smaller, but are also present on crowned pigeons, which are our largest living pigeons, and the Fiji giant flightless pigeons.
Cool.
So this is something that has shown up multiple times on large ground-dwelling island pigeons. Solitaires seem to have been the most extreme version of that.
Yeah. Man, this makes me think of the good feathers from Animaniacs, the gangster pigeons. And it's like, this is their built-in blackjack.
Well, I'm picturing you have a gang of pigeons, and then their enforcer is a solitaire that they bring out.
Yeah.
And they're like, all right, Bugsy, give them what for.
So cool.
So, the Mascarene Islands were once, until just a few hundred years ago, home to this very small, only 2 species, lineage of giant flightless island pigeons, with dodos and solitaires, both of which went extinct in the last few hundred years due to human arrival on the islands and the ways that our arrival interfered with the local ecosystems. I think it is really valuable to zoom out a little bit and mention the fact that dodos are the by far the most famous of the species that were driven extinct in the Mascarene Islands, but they are nowhere near the only ones.
Yeah.
At least 24 species of birds are known to have gone extinct in the Mascarenes in the last couple hundred years. There were Mauritian ducks, Mauritian turtle doves, the red rail that I mentioned before, Mascarene coots, a couple of owls that were native to the islands.
Ugh.
A lot of other species have been extirpated. So they were once on the island. They're not fully extinct, but they don't live on Mauritius anymore. And at least 24 other species of birds have been introduced to the island where they weren't there before. The bird community of this island has completely shifted since humans arrived. Similarly with reptiles, the giant tortoises that were once on these islands, the genus Cylindraspis, that genus is now extinct. There were several species in it. All of those tortoises are gone. There were multiple species of large skinks, large island skinks. Also, and I hadn't put these together, the round island burrowing boas.
Oh,
which
whoa.
I believe, if I remember correctly, are the first species of snake known to have been driven extinct by humans in recent time, is from the same region. Round Island is one of these islands in this area. Yeah, we've done a number on it. There was also at least one species of native bat. So dodos are one example out of dozens of species on Mauritius and nearby islands that were driven to extinction by the same pressures. And that is a pattern that we have seen in islands all around the world.
Yes.
We've mentioned this before, but we've rarely zoomed in on any particular examples. Out of all of the habitats in the world that have suffered under the influence of human activity, islands have had it about the worst.
Yep.
They're small, they're isolated, they tend to be home to very specialized species. And when that ecosystem gets disturbed or when other species get brought in, it really messes up those ecosystems.
Well, and there's no escape. Like,
And you can't go anywhere. You
you
can't
can't
fly.
you can't move to another region to like we see that in mainland areas where like we came in and disrupted the mountain lion community and their numbers went down, but they also moved. Like,
Mhm.
they moved away from human communities. On an island, where are you going to go?
Right.
Like, so you're stuck there with all the human effects. You can't shift around human society. So it's just this, you're trapped with us. You are locked in here with us,
Yeah.
and it's bad.
Now, I also want to point out, I don't want to paint a picture of Mauritius as a desolate wasteland because again, people live there. There
Yes.
are people and there are also lots of plant and animal species that are still alive on the island, including endemic species that are only found there. There are nowadays a bunch of protected areas and conservation efforts that are specifically set up to help protect the species that remain, which does bring me to the last thing that I wanted to talk about, which is the legacy of the dodo.
Yeah.
Dodos have they are a really tragic story. Like, we naturalists, right? Charles Darwin missed out on dodos by like a century and a half,
Yep.
right? We just missed having the opportunity to study these birds. Every new thing we learn about them, they're extremely cool, very unique, and we showed up at their home and they were wiped out. But the tragedy of these birds' story has led to them becoming this really famous symbol. In fact, in the nation of Mauritius, dodos are featured on the national coat of arms, and also the national football team is known as the Dodos.
Aww.
And even broader, the image of a dodo, the species dodos, are used as a symbol of extinction
Mm-hmm.
that fuels conservation efforts.
Yes.
Like, dodos are often put forth as, here is a reason for us to protect, this is what could happen.
Yeah.
And so their story is very sad, and they've been misrepresented quite a bit, right, as big and slow and dumb birds. But they hold they are a really important global cultural symbol in a way that really no other animal is.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it does make me wonder, and this is one of those where it's impossible to know, but had we not had this experience, not to say it's good they went extinct, but had we not had the experience with dodos, I do wonder, like, would we have appreciated what extinction truly was? Like, how much would that have lagged?
Right.
Would it just have been another species that finally had to teach us that lesson?
Yeah.
And go, oh, right, so this is for real and happening now. Like, that lesson does seem like it got driven home by the dodo of, yeah, this is real, it's happening, and we can cause it. Harsh light of day now. You
Yes.
can't ignore it.
Also, it feels like, just for completeness' sake, in this discussion of dodo extinction and dodo legacy, and in the year 2025, it feels important to mention dodos have also become, because they are an important discussion point in the topic of extinction, they have also become a major part of the discussion of de-extinction.
Yes.
And I bring this up because if you Google dodos now, you will not go far before you are taken to the website of Colossal Biosciences, where they're talking about their plan to resurrect and revive dodos. This is the same company that recently claimed to have resurrected direwolves, and it claims that they want to bring back mammoths. For what it's worth, their stated plan is to use Nicobar pigeons, which are closely related to dodos, to do some genetic editing, create as best they can a dodo genome, and then make dodo eggs to then be reintroduced to the island of Mauritius. We don't have time to go into a whole big discussion about this. That's nonsense. This is the
Yes.
same sort of nonsense that Colossal has been pushing and spreading since they did their direwolf thing. The website page about dodos is full of inaccurate or outdated information.
Yep.
Dodos are not going to be resurrected from extinction, but the reason that they are part of this discussion is because like dodos are they're a really interesting species to come up when we talk about de-extinction, because they would seem to be one of the last species that even if we could properly bring things back from extinction, which we can't. And just to be clear, Colossal is planning to genetically engineer a new made-up dodo-like thing, like their
Yes.
made-up direwolf-like thing. But even if we could resurrect dodos, this is a single species that lives on a single island whose ecosystem is completely different than it was a
Yes.
few hundred years ago. As far as conservation goes, as far as restoring ecosystems, dodos are not a very impactful choice to do that with. The reason that dodos are part of that conversation is because they are this symbol of extinction. This is driven by that. To put it charitably, the idea that if we can bring this species back, this is the species that more than any other species symbolizes our guilt over
Yes.
the impact we as humans have had on the ecosystems around us. This is the one. And so dodos have become almost synonymous with human-caused extinction.
Yeah.
And so they show up in conservation discussions. They show up in these talks of, quote, de-extinction. That is how powerful a symbol dodos have become.
They get treated and feel like our conservation original sin. Like
Yes.
this is where we started down and then continued down the wrong path.
Mhm.
And it's why a lot of like thylacines come up with that same thing. And even though it's not confirmed that why woolly mammoths went extinct, I think the fact that we know we hunted them is part of
Mhm.
the reason there's such a feeling.
We didn't help.
Exactly. Like we know we were killing them and then they went extinct, and it's hard not to feel suspicious, suspicion cast upon ourselves. And yeah, that deep sense of ecological guilt, I think, is a
Mhm.
big part of what drives so much of this. Yeah.
Yeah. And dodos are at the center of that discussion. And so they are a species whose reputation has become so much bigger than the ratio between how big a deal these animals were, like in an actual physical real world sense, and how big a deal they are to us culturally is probably bigger than any other species,
Yep.
any other extinct species. Like, because even T-Rex is like, yeah, T-Rex has a huge reputation, but T-Rex was also like a really big deal. That was a
Yes,
really important.
absolutely.
It was all over North America. Like, that was a big deal. This is a bird that lived on an island.
Yep.
This was, not to diminish. It's a very cool bird,
Yeah.
but this is one out of so many different species of cool flightless island dwelling birds. This one has become this incredible cultural milestone.
Yes. Well, it's gives the feeling. I had this thought with the direwolves when that was first came up. Of people get so excited about them because they have fantasy views of a direwolf in their brain, and it's like, yeah, but a living direwolf, you would probably have trouble telling apart from just a wolf.
Yes.
Like, unless you know wolf proportions really good to be able to go, no, that's an average person probably just be like a weird looking wolf. Dodos fall in that category of, if we did have dodos in zoos, I bet there would be no line at their habitat, because they are they are a cool animal, but I think that they would become just a very much like it's a dodo. Like, it
Right.
is not an elephant. It is not this, an ostrich, which is big
Yeah.
and weird.
It's a goofy
It,
little bird.
it's a goofy little bird. Like, I think if they were still around, we would care about them almost not at all.
Yeah. This is one of those. It's like the no one would say nice things about these birds until they were gone.
Yeah, exactly. No
Like,
one bought
yeah,
this bird flowers until its funeral.
The most famous and well-known thing about these birds is that they're extinct.
Yes. It's a very like we said, they are very cool animals, but they're also in many ways there are a bunch of other birds that are also like similar in regards of big chunky island birds. So it's this weird dynamic where their reputation has gotten so blown out of proportion that it has kind of warped people's perception of the actual animal in many ways.
Yeah. So fascinating group to talk about. There are tons of other like historical records and stuff that I didn't go into specifically. There has been a lot written about these birds because again, both in popular writings but also in the scientific literature. There's a ton about trying to sort out how they lived, their extinction. There have been tons of papers just on trying to figure out when they went extinct. These are an extremely famous group. And so they were tons of fun to read about, especially because, like what you just said, there were a bunch of surprises in these notes for me.
Yeah.
Because we have this image in our head of what a dodo is, and it's wrong in a lot of ways.
Yes. I'm much more a fan of dodos than I like them.
They're really cool. Like these are really cool birds.
Absolutely. Also, like the glut of research that has been done on them to me also gives some feeling of like scientific FOMO of we should have been able to study this animal while alive and we messed that up. So now we have to do the best we can with every scrap we can cobble together. Like this is as good as we can get for an animal that I should just be able to study in human care. Like I should just be able to go down to the zoo and study the dodos they have, but we messed that up. So now I have to read this sailor's notebook. And that's what it feels like there's this sense of no,
I would have done better. I would have saved it.
Yeah.
If I had been there, I could have, yeah, it's a really tragic story. Yes. From start to finish, it is a very tragic story, the story of dodos.
Ugh.
Listeners, thank you so much for joining us for this fascinating, what a just fascinating topic. Before we wrap up, there is one last thing to do, and that is to answer a patron question. One of the benefits that patrons can receive at certain levels on our Patreon is the ability to submit questions for us to answer here on the podcast. Will, what is our patron question today?
Our question is from Zelfia, who asks, has there ever been fossil evidence of super cool island evolution in a location where a physical island may not exist anymore? Like some species on an island in the Tethys Sea. Is that something you could even identify? And if so, how?
Great question, Zelfia. Yes, absolutely. We have evidence of islands that don't exist anymore. Generally, these tend to be places that once were islands but now are just part of the continent.
Yes.
The famous example of this, the one that comes to my mind first, is that during the late Cretaceous, Europe was a bunch of islands.
Yeah.
As a combination of tectonic forces, which meant that some areas were uplifted and others were deep down basins, and the fact that sea levels were very high, a bunch of Europe was archipelago, a bunch of different isolated islands. And we talked in episode 106 about Franz Nopcsa, who was one of the first people to study ancient, dinosaurs and other reptiles and stuff from Europe in the late Cretaceous and go, some of these are odd in their adaptations. We can identify where islands used to be based on the geology, right? The sediments being over here, all around it is ocean sediments, but then there's land here, but also the animals that live there.
Yeah.
Hatseg Island is a famous locality that today is just part of Romania. It's on the continent, but during the late Cretaceous was an island in the Tethys Sea. Yeah. So, yes, it was home, for example, to Megarosaurus, which was a dwarf sauropod, which was still huge. Like, I think Megarosaurus is like cow-sized, which is preposterously small for a sauropod, but still bigger than most animals.
Yes.
And also Hatzegopteryx, the giant pterosaur, is known from that area. There are also other examples. In the Gargano and Scontrone regions of Italy during the Miocene, there was an archipelago there. Again, geology and fossils. That is the second place that comes to mind because Gargano is where Garganornis was discovered. And Garganornis, we talked about in the news when that happened, was a giant flightless goose that had wing weapons.
Yeah.
Hit each other with. But alongside Garganornis, there were giant mice like Microtia, giant hedgehogs like Dinogalerix. So these are places where now they are part of the continent, but they hold the record of where there used to be an island, and you get these examples of island evolution.
Yes. And island syndrome and the features of island evolution are not 100% consistent. We talked in the news not too long ago about those foxes that defy it,
Mm-hmm.
but it is such a established effect of organisms growing on an islands that if you find a population that has unusually large small animals and unusually small large animals, there's really only one reason we've come across where you're gonna find that kind of combination of organisms.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not gonna happen just in a forest for some other reason. That really only happens on islands.
Yeah. Now, as far as examples of islands where the physical island is gone, I don't know of any examples of that because I imagine that that wouldn't work because if the island is gone, anything that was left on the island is gone. Or if
Yeah.
the island has been like submerged, then it's submerged and we're going to have a hard time getting to it. So
Yep.
it's not impossible to get like island examples that are like on a seamount or something,
Mhm,
but I
mhm.
don't know that that's ever actually been determined. The
Yeah.
examples of famous ancient islands tend to be land masses that are not islands now, but used to be isolated.
Yes.
Very cool question. If you want to hear more about that kind of stuff, check out episode 4, Island Evolution. Check out episode 106, where we talked about Nopcha, who was one of the first people to recognize those. Check out episode 144, where we talked about evolutionary gigantism and dwarfism. All of those, we touch on these topics. Thank you, Zelfia, for that question. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Be sure, if you want to learn more or see more, to check out the blog post that will be up on our website. Link in the episode description. We'll have pictures of dodos and links to more information. Thank you again to all of our requesters who requested this topic. Remember, if there's a topic you would like to hear us talk about, also go to our website and fill out the topic request form. Thank you to our patrons who help support everything that we do. An extra special thanks to our top tier patrons, Bogdraw, Sarah May, Danielle Loves Bugs, and Jeff Ellington. Don't forget, this episode comes out in mid-September, and Spooky is coming up all throughout
Yes.
October. Episodes of Spooky will be releasing every Saturday, then Cutie, then the Spooky live stream. It's going to be so good. Hop on the Discord if you want to be part of the Spooky discussion. Also, halfway through Spooky, we're going to be making a trip down to the Fernbank Museum in Atlanta on October 18th to do a museum meetup with fans. So come join us there. We would love to see you.
Yes.
We release episodes every fortnight. Stay tuned in 2 weeks for episode 227, which will be about something. And we'll talk more about science and stuff. And every joke that I can think about that's like a dodo joke is rude. And now I don't want to be rude to dodos.
Yeah, right? I am still thinking about Solitaire's wing weapons, and now I want to see a poster that's like boxing match promotion between Solitaire and the Island Goose with its wing weapons.
Oh, Garganornis versus... Yeah.
Yes! The fight of the century! Come down this Sunday!
All right, artists. You know what to do. The idea of a solitaire Pokemon is actually like a dodo Pokemon and a solitaire Pokemon is actually they would make a perfect candidate for a Pokemon.
Yes, make it a fossil Pokemon and
oh,
like
rock and fighting type.
yes, and it'd just be so cool. You can make it this little scrappy, rookie fighter when it's in its first evolution. That's just a little pigeon, and it's serious in fighting, and then it's this bruised up Rocky style boxer. Oh,
amazing. All right, bye everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Common Descent Podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.